Hi everybody, good afternoon. Just take a little bit of a story. So you're mostly surveyors here, I take it, right? Building surveyors, that kind of thing. Structural engineers? Yeah, a couple of structural engineers. Any other architects? All right, okay, very good. Okay, good. The talk, I'm part scripted, I'm part talking to some selection of slides. What I suggest you all do, please, regardless, if you have a question, a burning question in the midst of presentation, just interrupt, because having a dialogue is probably a really good way to communicate the information that you guys want, because I'm normally used to speaking to maybe other architects or client groups as opposed to other professionals. So if there's something that you think you need to know from what I'm showing you, please do interrupt, let me know, and we can have a chat about kind of what's going on. A little bit of what I'm talking about too is about kind of practice, professional property practice, which I'll kind of go over a little bit in the course of the presentation. So good afternoon, everybody. I hope you find this presentation provocative, if not informative. I formed this as much to be a point from which we can launch in some interesting discourse through our Q&A later, as well as being a tour through these few interesting projects. My main focus today will be on the progress at Roche Old Court, which is in Wiltshire, East Winterslow in Wiltshire. And that's kind of pictured here in its current state. We've been working on this project for 3 years now, and I'll tell you some more about it as we move forward. So why do we value listed buildings? Well, kind of there's a thought for you, isn't it? You know, these buildings are problematic. They're controlled by strict legislation. If one gets it wrong, there's potential for fines and imprisonment for those indiscretions. The buildings are inefficient. They're structurally problematic. And in many ways, and more often than not, they don't fit current standards or fulfill the basic needs of modern living. And as you probably know, acting for your clients, they want to change much of the building once they get into their renovations and alterations to the buildings. And yet, society has made these artifacts important, significant in terms of defining culture and place. There is other inherent value that probably is overlooked, and that might be to do with in the face of climate change and the shortage of a built estate, which might be useful for housing, for instance. These existing structures become additionally useful, and there's also a significant amount of carbon. And we know the issue about carbon capture and carbon store and stored in these existing buildings. But this is only helpful if there's enough of a building to save. And as I mentioned before, a lot of times we embark on these projects and we find that the building, although the local authority wanting it to be preserved, is pretty much falling apart and is not fit for purpose. But let's face it, repurposing all the redundant and unused historic estate available in the UK is not going to solve the global climate crisis or the housing problem. But it's a start, and there are lessons to be learned that can be shared in the expertise exported. So there are other useful models that come from our dealing and challenge with listed buildings. I mean, this is just a housing project we did. It's all new build, but it's based on traditional principles of construction, building form, community, and part of getting to this stage in the project was doing a significant contextual analysis of this particular area and picking up the salient features in the buildings that relate particularly to that area. These lessons are particularly in examples of traditional town planning, as I just mentioned, that provide further lessons. Ideas such as crafting a building and building to last and the principles around the 20-minute city should be noted and applied to the new work as much as that to do with the historic asset. So the 20-minute city, I don't know if you're familiar with that, but that's just based on principles of the village, you know, being able to walk from one place to another and you know, things be relatively sustainable, as they call it today. In the paper that you have, I've set out some basic facts and general watch points on listed building work. So let's move on and look at some examples of the work and some of the issues we've dealt with. So this is the new mill in Eversley. This project was a design and build commission, actually, where we assisted in obtaining planning and listed building permissions and provided some basic building regulations level drawing information so the new owners could progress work on the buildings over a period of time relative to their budget and cash flow. And I think we mentioned Owl Building Surveyors earlier. John, he was actually the building regulations surveyor for this project. He's very good, by the way. At the time the clients acquired the building, it was unoccupied and it had been for a while. It suffered from alterations, including unauthorized works. So this is things they didn't get permission for at the time, but were never picked up on by the local authority, which needed to be regularized. This was dealt with along with the necessary change of use application, as the mill was previously a restaurant. As mentioned, we were involved throughout the work only sporadically, so the clients would call us up if they had a specific problem once we kind of got through parts of the building regulations stage. But of course, being clients, they didn't execute the scheme as we achieved permissions for. So we actually had to resubmit a whole new set of applications in order to regularize the next stage of alterations that the new clients did, which weren't to the approved plans that we actually agreed with the local authority prior to that. So you do all this consultation with your fellow conservation officer, and you get him on site, and he trusts you. Then he shows up on site one day, and he's like, "What's all this? I didn't approve any of this." So we had to go back. Fortunately, we managed to regularize everything the client did, which weren't particularly. There are some formal bits of the building that were changed, but nothing terribly awful, actually. And so the following images I'll show you are some ideas of how we built up the set of information that we provided to the local authority to get permission and agree to the design with the clients. So here's the kind of typical set of drawings where we're trying to show kind of the phasing of the building over time. And you can see the older core of the building are these colors here and then here. So kind of phase 1, 2, 3. And then all the reddy, pinky orange, and pinky and orange is all new construction, kind of post-1970. So all this was allowed to be built. This actually got permission back in the day. This was all the restaurants. This is kind of the dining area, contract kitchen, which I'll show you a lovely picture of in a moment, and then areas that were completely gutted and turned into like a faux, almost like medieval bar with fake beams and the whole lot. So we had to kind of go in and kind of create the dialogue for the local authorities so they can understand the building, and then they can understand what we and our clients were trying to do to move forward, to actually make the thing kind of habitable and useful as a house. So you can see here's the mill races and the water courses that surrounded there's the mill race there, there's the mill pond was over here. There was a track and a ford through the river here, and that's the form of the buildings over here. And then there was a big parking lot that was part of the property that's over here. It's like the huge tarmac area, and a thatch building here with a little generator in it, which was again part of the original thing. There was actually the water wheel was still intact. It's in that area there, and all the mill workings, which I've got an image of for you, is sitting here. So we had to retain all those features. The client was very committed to it, but it was quite interesting what we found moving forward. So again, elevations and sections to reflect the phasing of the building over time. Interestingly, so this is where the mill workings are. This whole roof, although it looks kind of lovely and traditional piecemeal, it was a completely new roof. We went up in the roof, it was all modern sawn timbers, there was nothing historic about it at all. And in fact, much of this had been rebuilt in concrete block. Once we stripped off some of the finishes, we were able to, once we got into the building and did this kind of investigation, we were able to tell the local authority and get better agreements than you would if it was all original historic fabric. But in any case, it's all listed regardless. It doesn't matter that that's 1970s and that's kind of 18th century. It's all listed building. So it all has to be dealt with under planning and listed building. This is just a view of the modern bit looking over the river. That's the kind of a glazed dining room that we kind of reclad eventually. You can see some of the lovelier details here. See that air source heat pump just stuck on the roof? It's all this kind of thing going on, which is all stripped off. And then some of the, as we found it, kind of images, these kind of weird dormer things they added to the building. This is the mill race. Here you can see very unloved, another air source heat pump. This pub room that I was talking about earlier, kind of just all faux timbers. We did have to do a repair here. So those acros are holding up a couple of beams where we had to put in a new masonry pier, which I'll show you at the end. And then again, this was in part of the older part of the building, but all this new structure was inserted without permission at the time, not by our clients, by the previous restaurant owners. And there were lots of weird steel bracing that wasn't actually doing anything. So once we had a structural engineer in, they very helpfully helped us strip all this nonsense out, which actually wasn't actually doing any work. But some nice original timber work. There was some decent purlins and timber panels in the building, which kind of come next. Then we have the mill workings here, all completely intact. There was even the hopper, the grain hopper, which was up in the ceiling void, pulleys, everything. That's all still there. And so part of the value, the thing that we're communicating to a local authority is part of the value in letting our clients, in convincing the local authority to let our clients get on with these kind of renovations and do some things to make it more of a home than a museum piece, is that all this stuff gets retained. So they get a concession in one area to do something else, but at the same time, these are retained and restored. In fact, this is a very slow-moving project because of funding, but they're currently looking at the mill race and the mill wheel and how they can actually get that restored eventually, which is basically behind this wall. You can see the gears, the wheel sits behind that wall in the mill race and turns around. Some very interesting details, really nice stone corbels, timber beams, this kind of sunken area, which was obviously designed to flood. It has this kind of thing. But we did have McLennan Waterproofing come in and help us with some damp proofing and waterproofing options, which was really helpful as well. And then some first floor construction. You could see there were some really decent timber beams up in there, quite old, anyway, it's still going on, by the way. That's why there's no real finished pictures yet, but it's proceeding nicely with the client. So, and then just this was the contract kitchen, so you got an idea of what this place was like. It was really bad shape. And then that glazed room on the end of the building that I showed you earlier, which was it was all very much kind of Jacobean, kind of, very oldie, Tudory kind of detailing where it didn't belong. So, the client stripped a lot of that out and they're kind of getting on. This is going to be their new kitchen, actually, looking out over the garden and the river. And then just some of the 18th century timber work in part of the building. We had to salvage, roof was covered in tin when we took it over. We had to salvage and rebuild all of this. All this cob wall and brick infill wall was falling down. Builder stripped it out, straightened it up. Again, we were talking about lime mortar earlier, brick and lime mortar and render. And then this kind of detail that we used to hold up quite a significant piece. This here is holding up this corner of the building. So this is first floor. So this is all kind of helping to support quite a bit of structure, and that's why it needed to be so robust as opposed to just a timber column. So the big project that I'll be talking about as we go along is called Roche Old Court, as I said earlier. That will kind of run through this presentation. We started that project in 2021. It's a collection of buildings, which I'll kind of show you in a minute. So here we are in about May last year, actually, 2024. And just to orientate you, these are the kind of different buildings. So south is basically this way, north is up here. Grade 2 star listed house with so that's 17th century with a early 19th century timber hall attached to it, but we think the footprint was older. Grade 2 star listed tithe barn, absolutely gorgeous, and then got a nice internal shot of that. Grade 2 star listed stables, a grade 2 listed stables, grade 2 listed cart shed, and an unlisted attached building, flint and brick in the same vocabulary, but not listed. The listing doesn't mention it. However, it's listed by virtue of its proximity to the building. So even though it's not described, the conservation officer still gives that the same status as these other buildings that are named in the listing. And this building here, so there was another barn here, which I'll get to shortly, which was called the farm manager's house. It was actually part of the agricultural estate back in the 1930s, and that was actually a farm manager's dwelling there. And because of that status and its ancillary nature to the rest of the buildings, we were able to get permission to rebuild that as a large-scale 3-bedroom bit of ancillary accommodation for the clients. They've got family in Texas that come over and lots of family nearby as well. This was a 50s coach house, as they call it, which again, we'll see a little bit more of that in a bit. So for me, this project is an example of how we need to think about kind of running our businesses in a more dynamic way, as much as it is about doing the day job of dealing with the historic buildings and the architecture and the design itself. We need to get away from the kind of process-led practice. That's kind of the reactive model. You know, we're all sitting in our garrets. I mean, sorry if I'm painting you guys all with this picture, but sitting in our garrets, waiting for the client to come to us. Instead, we need to move to what I kind of term as a super service-led approach, which is kind of a can-do mindset, you know, no holds barred presumption in anticipation of successful outcomes. In other words, having the confidence to be, you know, reaching out to the people who need our services and really pushing the potential in, you know, property and what anybody wants to try to do. And there are a few components to this. It's kind of being proactive in identifying the opportunity and fitting that to the client's needs. So actually finding things, if you know your clients, or you think you have agents or other people who know clients who might want a certain thing. It's going out and finding that and then bringing it to the table and basically creating business for yourself. I think that's a very important thing that we should all be doing. And being bold and having the confidence in what is achievable, you know, flexing one's professional experience and muscle. So for 20 years, I worked for I was a director of a multidisciplinary planning and architecture practice. And the problem with that was town planners, they're very, oh, what does the policy say? Oh dear, you can't do it. And it's like, well, how do we serve our clients that way? Don't we have to find the loopholes and the opportunities beyond just what the letter of something says? And you know, for me right now, that's working phenomenally well, to be honest, as opposed to just saying, what do you want to do? No, you know, the policy says no, forget about it. Because you're actually able to move forward beyond that in good reasonable negotiations with our town planning partners in the local authority. And at the end of the day, they need our help in doing their jobs because they are under-resourced, they're underpaid, they have no time, and the more that we reach out to them instead of the adversarial relationship that perhaps sometimes we have, the more we reach out to them, the more success we're all going to have, because they're going to be happy because they're like, oh, this guy's really reasonable and giving us good ideas, and he's moving things forward. And not just this thing, well, I'm right, I'm the architect or whatever. It's a ridiculous position. You have to be more creative. Although in the background you might be thinking that your professional opinion is correct, but it's helping them make that decision along the way. And then just being effective and assertive, I've been saying, establishing alliances and building trust, such as with favored consultants and the local authority, again, to reinforce. Be positive and clear about the enhancements to be achieved and the benefits therein for all concerned. Chase the issues at hand, particularly client aspirations. And keep these achievable. So remember, we're working for our clients. They're paying our bills. So we want to get them what they want at the end of the day, within reason, and that's the achievable bit. But at the end of the day, we really want to get them what they want, and so that's really important. And assisting in compromise where necessary. That's the bit where, I really get what you want, but maybe if you just do this, we might get you more or less to where you want to be. And just be aware of the potential bumps in the road. So being bold and confident, but you have to caveat a little bit and say, well, I can't guarantee, for instance, what planning officer, what conservation officer we're going to be dealing with. And we know, say, with this particular local authority, we have an officer who's very strict. And so you just have to kind of raise those things ahead of time, still with a view that you're going to push the boat out for your clients and to achieve their aspirations. And they're kind of, the fallout from this is there are a lot of consultants who are willing, and I've had this many times, they get a commission from a client, they do the drawing, they do the design, they lob it in, and they do nothing. And then they get a refusal, and the client's like, well, what happened? I got a refusal. I'm like, well, did they monitor the process during the course of the local authority considering that planning application? Did they have a dialogue with the officer in order to sort out these, what inevitably are resolvable issues potentially with a proposal? And it turns out they don't. And of course, what happens is, we get the work at the end of the day. There'll be the next example will kind of speak to that a little bit. But I'll kind of come back in and out to some of these themes as we go through the projects. At the end of 2021, again, I knew that my clients who have taken on this project, they were trying to move down from London. They had family in the area. They wanted to kind of build this kind of family seat. So I found the opportunity for them. And they actually bought the site at auction and moved forward on that basis. But the previous work I did for them was on this project here. So this is Vine Cottage in Overwallop. So this was the first project I did for the clients who now own Roche Old Court. And it was basically a miniature version of what we were doing at Roche Court. It was a grade 2 listed cottage with a small unlisted barn. And they wanted to convert that to better living space. And they also needed a large extension for the family to land from London when they came and visit their parents who were then living in this house. This is in Test Valley, but it's literally 10 minutes away from Roche Court. So we have listed building, listed thatch cottage. The barn was listed by virtue of its connection, and this is the new wing that we built, and I'll show you how we achieved that. This connection here was a much more matter-of-fact, not very nice thing, very opaque, and we converted that to a more flat roof. We reduced the impact of a pitched roof here and made it more transparent to try to emphasize the break between the two. This was a barn here, and it had a kind of a weird flat lit kind of in this area. It had like a bedroom inside the roof space, and then a kind of a stairs and a little sitting area down below. So the opportunity here was unlocked through some simple research, actually. There were previous consultants on this, and they received a refusal simply because they missed the key to gaining agreement with the local authority and the conservation officer. This lever was in finding the historic precedent for development, and this discovery, along with a more considered design approach for the barn, celebrating its inherent internal volume, set the scene for the approval, which was achieved. So, for instance, in the scheme the other consultants did, they filled this space with accommodation, and just like took away the whole barn quality of the building, and didn't give back any concession. So in our reconfiguring of that, it created a more sympathetic relationship between the two, and that was seen as very helpful, as well as reducing the impact of development within this building by, celebrating the barn space. I'll show you that in a minute. So there's the Vine Cottage there, there's the barn, and in this plan is the historic footprint of the old barn buildings forming this courtyard. Okay, so which is what we recreated here, and it was only by virtue of doing our historic research and finding the precedent. And the conservation, once he saw that, he was completely against it. But once he saw that, he was like, "Oh, great! It's historic precedent. I can permit that because I can see that there was a building there before. I'm happy with the way you dealt with the hierarchy. So cottage, barn, what we call the stable block. So there's a nice kind of diminishing massing on the site between the buildings, and that kind of got us our permission. And here we are. Celebration of the barn, double height space, exposing timbers, and just kind of getting all these details right, so that there's more pictures of this on the website, a lot more extensive, but I just thought I'd show you a sample here for the moment. So back to Roche Court. So here's here's the plan at 1876 to 79. So here we have the grade 2-star listed house and hall. What was, we think, an old well building, but the well is actually inside the hall. The grade 2-star listed barn, the cottage, as we call it. The coach house, interestingly, isn't on this plan, which is about here. And then the listed range at on the highway. Interestingly, again, so here we have precedent for other buildings on the site. So these are all gone, but you can see there was an extensive range of buildings on the site, which actually, if you wanted to extend the building forms further, that would be a good precedent to work from. We didn't follow that in the end. We didn't need to, but for the future, one could use that for precedents. The other interesting thing to do is look in your local archives. Howard Phipps, a very well-known local Wiltshire artist, 1980s, did a woodcut of the barn. And he also had old photographs of the barn. So we now have, we're going to refurbish the barn. So we now know exactly what this, the shape and size of everything and what the barn looked like. And, the steepness of the pitch of the cart bay. There's an end elevation of the cottage, which is completely replaced. And I'll show you that in a minute. Then we have some images of the site at purchase. So some of this is from the auction images catalog. So here we are. There's the selection of buildings, completely overgrown, unloved, just completely run down. And unloved. This is what it looked like when we took it on. Coach house, cottage, grade 2-star listed barn, grade 2 listed buildings and cart shed, and then just off shot here are the unlisted stable buildings. And just some more. This had a concrete tile roof, concrete block walls. It wasn't a traditional building. It was completely cobbled together from other bits and pieces. See the state of the barn. Lost the end bay, which had that splayed end that you saw in the Howard Phipps image. And this is the house, you know, just being subsumed by nature, and kind of, you know, just left to fall down. That's the barn range from the lane. This is the coach house. So we've restored this building completely as it is, restored the sliding doors, left these windows intact. We actually were able, that wasn't actually rotten, so we saved it. So again, another thing, we didn't actually need any permissions for this because we were basically just making good, and it wasn't listed. So it was a really good get. There's a whole first floor kind of games room up in there, and there's the cottage from the courtyard side as it was. There's the barn, and this is absolutely gorgeous. It's all intact. The only issues are the old cart shed on this side of the building is gone, so we're going to reinstate that in due course. And then this was the state of the interior of the house. Can you see that? I mean, it was piled waist high in detritus. It was unreal. So all that had to be cleaned out by our clients to make room, and that was just the start of figuring out really what was wrong with the building, because you couldn't see anything. It was absolutely covered with this stuff. So then we come to setting the strategy and building value, which is what we want to do, isn't it? Not just draw drawings and whatever, but February 2022, after the client successfully won the bid at auction for the site, actually in December 21, enabling work started in early 22. The house was cleared out. You saw the mess it was, and the contractors arrived on site in May 2022. Stabilization works were, so this is another shot of the house. The house again. You see the state of it. It was unbelievable. And this was the second. So you saw that the pictures I showed you earlier were on the ground floor. This is in the roof space of the house. It was just incredible. This kind of level of deterioration and uncared for state. But we had original doors. We have original timbers everywhere. It's really nice building. Once you cleaned it up a bit. And then just some of the you saw, you know, vegetation coming into the building through the, you know, leaded steel windows. You have ceilings falling down, lath and plaster just completely gone. Everything was inundated with mold and damp. It was absolute wreck. There were where there's some paneling in some of the rooms, behind it was all bird and mice, rats' nests, a whole lot. So. And here's the barn where we then, before stabilization works, and then these were done, and the side access in this fashion just temporarily until we figured out what we're going to do in order to repair the barn. And then we had to achieve site access, temporary drives, hard standings for contractors and service vehicles, and other general clearance was taking place. And there's the barn from the inside, kind of all tidied up so it wasn't going to get blown over. Here's some of the paneled rooms here. In the meantime, so this is 17th century paneling. The assessment of this paneling was as good as some of what they got at Hampton Court. Two very small rooms, but it was really special Bolection mold and paneling. And these two, they're tiny rooms. They're really, really interesting. But so all that's being restored as we speak. Again, damage to the building, extensive throughout. Again, another condition image of the of one of the rooms. All this is fake. So all this stuff here, that's foam patterned, fake. It's not even plaster. It's horrible. This is just something you bought from a stage. The old owner bought from some theater company or something. There's another one on the other side. They're all gone. We've exposed the paneling. The paneling is being stripped, restored. We're putting the windows. These alcoves are windows on that side of the building, which we're reinstating. All this is, again, just faked up, kind of not very valuable in historic building terms. In the meantime, the development strategy was reviewed. So originally we were going to start with the barn, but we decided we talked the client around. We said, look, we can get you some easier wins here before we start on a serious restoration of the barn. And that some of those unlisted buildings would be a better target for some of the first bit of development, and an easier planning in, as I said. And this would help again to build value once we got some useful real estate on the site. So the barn was being surveyed by David Brooks of Decadet. I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with him. He's very good. So he did a full assessment, historic review of the timber and what needed to be done. So that's kind of in hand in the background. But it was clear that was going to take some time to deal with as well. So it was better that we worked on some other parts of the development in the meantime. So applications were submitted for the existing cottage. So this is the site plan for this building, which you saw earlier. So they're submitted in July 2022 and actually approved in September 2022. So we got a pretty good consideration there. Not bad timing. And very many thanks to Wiltshire Council because they were helpful in this process. The conditions were discharged by October 2022, and the first approval established a level of surety for the client and added value that helped in securing confidence in proceeding with the next phases. So just by getting this house about a 3,000 square foot building, that automatically established a sense for the client of, yeah, we can move forward here. We've got some value on site. We've got some new living accommodation. Let's kind of crack on to the next phases. Then here are just some of the planning drawings for this building. So house, barn buildings, cottage, coach house. There's the original cottage as it was. There it is again in its overgrown, falling down state. And there it is again. You can see the barn here, and the cottage is this form here. Just another shot of that. So then these are some of the design drawings. So I'm very much a hand drawing kind of person. I like doing it, And more. I was talking to some of our colleagues earlier. By drawing by hand, you learn more about the buildings than you do. We can let our guys go crazy with the CAD drawings and stuff. But if you draw it, from survey, you learn a lot more about the building. But anyway, so what we have is a new building to take place of here's the barn form. Here's the coach house here. A new building to take the place of the old cottage, but done in a kind of contemporary vernacular manner. It wants to still feel like a barn. It wants to still feel like part of the language of that barn complex. Here is so there's the coach house there, having its addition put on. There are that's the new cottage, barn in the background. A very wet site. It was horrible weather while we were doing all this. Here is it in its newly clad form, so fresh oak cladding. Lots of nice flint and brickwork by Albion Stone, and their masons did a lot of the work. And an IQ, 4.5 meter IQ glass sliding door, some bespoke louver details. we used handmade Tudor peg tiles on the roof. And initially you could see, I mean, they look brighter in the photograph, but they were quite bright, but they've actually toned down really nicely now over the course of time. So here's the building again, kind of coming into its own. Here's our big, this is all facing the south facing. A couple of details, kind of really using the barn vocabulary, oak timber frame done by Carpenter Oak down in Dorset. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they were very good. We talked about accuracy of architects' drawings previously. And I was just gonna, when they delivered the oak, it slotted right into its place, exactly right, first time, no problems. So we got all the detail exactly right, except for these little guys here. So on the other side of the building, where they came next to a bit of steel, they just had to cut them off in order to get some of the oak frame in place. But other than that, it worked absolutely perfectly. And it's a testament to Carpenter Oak as well, because they provided the accuracy of the manufactured pieces to, you know, sit in the right place at the right time. And then just some more shots of the building as it was going up in the very, very messy site. And that is a fantastic, again, Albion stone, absolutely wonderful work there. So. This rig here was for a open source heat pump system that we put in. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. Just some more contextual shots as going up. And there we are, almost done. And then as the interior is forming. So this is all the Carpenter Oak work here. We got our IQ glazed screen, huge double height space. So we're still paying respect to the agricultural nature of the site, really trying to, you know, internally as well as externally keep it contextual. I mean, we could have floored all this area, but, you know, it was first of all unnecessary, and it felt that would have been a real shame, you know, not to make another new barn on the site. And then, again, just a few more shots. Here's our IQ glazing, new oak timber frame, all getting ready to be finished off. So work's progressed on the cottage, and so the design philosophy is contextual and unashamedly derivative. They're celebrating the traditional forms and materials and casting the new building and the coach house conversion as secondary and tertiary structures amongst the collection of high status listed buildings, and the detail being kept simple and robust. So again, like with Vine Cottage, it's this idea about primary structures, secondary structures, tertiary structures, and trying to keep the development within an agreed language and hierarchy that everybody can understand, so that the new development doesn't overpower the existing listed buildings. We respected the scale and massing of the previous building, and the new is no taller and of a similar form. However, by using the level changes to our advantage, we could sink the ground floor down about 1.5 meters. We achieved a more dramatic and more usable volume. This without compromising the relationships with other buildings. So, if I just nip back to the planning drawings, it's catching up. So this is the original ground line here. And what we convinced the local authority is that, well, this all stays exactly at the same height as the original buildings, but we just go down. That's no big deal, is it? And they said, yeah, we think you're, so there's the ground line there. But the barn's up here, you know, so, and the coach house is in front of it. So in fact, by keeping this roof line in the same position, but just going down, everybody was happy. So that kind of worked out very well. Yeah. So in the meantime, applications for the main house we're embarking on the proposals for the main house, and that is all now progressing. That was submitted and validated in March 2023 and approved in July 2023. So actually we were doing all right. Interestingly, with that, we had a lot of trouble with Historic England, but a lot of help from Wiltshire because they wanted to see this project succeed. So here's the application for the house. There we go. There's the house and the site and the walled garden up here. The house is here. And the one thing that's quite important to note here is this is a grade 2 star listed building. We managed to get a quite large 40 meters squared extension to this building. No one thought we'd ever get this, but we actually managed it, which was pretty good. Even other prospective purchasers at bidding, they were like, "Oh, you're never going to achieve what you think you're going to achieve there," but we did. And that was just again about this dialogue with your other kind of consultants and the local authority and being positive. So there's the extension. This is the line of the original house here. Oh, and we also found that there was actually a front door here at one point. I mean, you can see all the stonework intact. So we proposed a new front door, and they accepted that as well. A new large dormer on the back of this cat slide here, which I'll talk about in a moment. And then just very simple but accurate hand-drawn drawings. And it's just the right feel for this kind of project. New dormer in the middle, replace the existing dormers, new front door, and then this rearward extension here, which is again carpenter oak. New big dormer there. We even allowed us some decent roof lights. So yeah, so we did pretty well in that way. Else submitted with the planning and list of building applications, just to give again local authority surety that we're serious about doing this properly. So cottage style windows, just everything to set the right tone for the authority being able to give us an approval. And then this larger double dormer that we achieved at the back of the building, kind of here. There's the extension, there's the big double dormer at first floor level. So we've been speaking to the local authority and to Historic England, as I said, about the potential for the house and what was possible. Wiltshire Council was very helpful and open to dialogue, HE less so. At the beginning of the project, there was a review of the listing, and the barn was actually originally designated as an ancient monument at the time, but this was actually a mistake. So it's really good to kind of query things as you go along. And that designation was removed, which made it easier for us to then move forward on other parts of the project. And it will make it easier when we get to the works to the barn. Then the main issue was concerning this area of the building. So there's this cat slide roof which comes down at the back of the building, or the outshut as the authority liked to call it, and that was seen as being kind of sacrosanct. So originally we had a proposal where we were building up here quite significantly and putting in a new stair and doing a lot of other things which no one liked, but we kind of got around that in the end. Then this is kind of some interior shots. You couldn't really walk through here. The purlin had sagged significantly, so that purlin is basically that purlin is up in here, in that part of the roof. And that's just some interior shots, which were interesting into what we found. Again, some more, you can see the significant issues here. Part of which was due to all the original oak rafters were gone, and they had put some rather insubstantial modern sawn timbers. This was all modern work. There were rosemary tiles mixed in there. It was all so changed. And again, by doing this investigation, that gave us the ammunition to bring to the authority and say, why can't we change it? It's been changed already. There's no reason why that shouldn't be acceptable. we think the building probably worked something like this. So these were kind of dialogue drawings that I used with the local authority, very loose, marking up, showing, so there's the ground floor. So original building, subsequent early additions and changes. So I think this was all external previously. We think this was a separate building with the well and kitchen in it. This was a cartway through, and there are bricks which we're taking up and putting back exactly in the same place, which have all the kind of grooves in it from use over time, which is quite neat. So this is a sketch that we're just trying to have a conversation with conservation officer about what's next, and showing the evidence, on which we can move forward in that way as well. Again, quite important kind of analysis. Again, and then really loose, really, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? This is what we think happened before, and it worked very well as a dialogue. So in the stripping out, we came across some very interesting things about the building. It had actually been, the whole building had been substantially altered and built out of reused timber from all over the place. So you can see here mortise. So there's one floor level there. Then there's a drop ceiling here, paneled room here. But all these mortises, these timbers are all from somewhere else. They've just been reused. The main beams are probably original because they need to be substantial. So they were probably cut for purpose. But a lot of this other stuff was actually either probably salvaged from some older medieval buildings on the site. And again, you can see it better here. These grooves, so there's a partition groove there. There's a mortise. You got some mortises and post holes. This extra drop ceiling timber here. It's all kind of these indicators as to the nature of this building being a real hybrid of its time even. Okay. In the meantime, we're moving forward and doing other operations. So the whole roof of the house itself had to be stripped, all the timbers numbered, and all the main roof timbers repaired and restored. So we had original structure with these kind of crux frame elements, but then everything else is just from somewhere else. I mean, there's amazing how much of the structure. This is probably an old floor beam or something here. You can see that the rafters. It's incredible how it was all put together from bits and pieces. All the hips needed replacing. Here's a timber that, this timber does not belong here. This was a partition in some old medieval building, but there it is, reused, up in the roof space. The timber repairs were all, as I said, taking place on the roof. And then here's, I said, roof images of the roof at different stages of development. So these are really strange. This is an eaves detail. So this was part of an eaves detail that created a cornice, which has now been refurbished around the house. Very weird kind of little sprockets that somebody developed. So they thought it was the right way to do it at the time, so they've all been left and reinforced. This was this corner. So here we are before repair, here we are after repair. Quite a new timber is required here because you can see the level of degradation in the corner. But we're still trying to take a conservative approach to this building, only replacing stuff that really needs to be replaced and putting back original fabric where we can. Again, floor structures, here we are again. There's all kinds of weird and wonderful bits of timber in here that, we just don't know where it's from. And then, of course, necessary strengthening, but keeping the original bits in situ and adding some strengthening where required. Again, just back to the roof, all the new hips, as I said before, an overview of that cat slide area. Again, the roof, no ridge, of course. It's a very old building, no ridge on the building at all. It's built in 2 stages, so all these rafters are separate from the rafters below. So there are 3 sets of rafters in that zone, in that zone, and in that zone. You can see it better here, all numbered up, and making sure it's all being put back where it was before. Dormer's ready to get finished off. That dormer was gone. That's been replaced by a conservation roof light. Bits of timber. Where was that supposed to be originally? It's just stuff where you wouldn't expect it to be. Just some more images. Original crock. This knee wall running through. Other bits of timber from wherever, used as rafters. Some more pictures of that roof plane with the dormers. All the chimneys were repointed and new chimney pots, etc., put on. So I mentioned the timber paneling earlier. It's quite an important feature of the house, which we're actually committed to restoring with the areas of Bolection molded panels. So we've stripped the paint off now, and it's quite interesting because it was assumed this was all oak paneling, but it's not. It's part oak, part pine. Some of the panels are oak and pine. It's quite a jumble of stuff, but there's still quite a fine bit of timber paneling there. And this room is a different room, but with kind of similar features. Well, I have to say it's really interesting when you work on these projects what you find. So one of our colleagues, historian and furniture consultant, because he was advising on the paneling, found a percussion stone, 10,000-year-old artifact just lying around outside in the property. We've got archaeologists on this job, and all the trenches that we've dug, which they've been examining, they found nothing yet. Just sitting there. So this is beautiful. It sits on my desk at home. Somebody, 10,000 years ago held this in their hand and made flint tools out of it. It's just an amazing little find, and you don't know what you're going to come across, in doing this job, which is part of the satisfaction, isn't it? So in the meantime, we had to put in a new 3-phase main, as you do. As I said, the open source heat pump system didn't work because, for some reason, somebody else used all the groundwater. So we thought there'd be plenty of it, but there wasn't. So we had to go to a closed loop system. So in the course of all this other expense, the poor clients had to put their hand in the pockets yet again and dig some slinky trenches and get a closed loop system working on the site. And that's just kind of a technical fix, So, then we're working on the house. As I said, we're doing the roof. The details for the house continue to be developed. And we got on with the working drawings. So we went from my planning purposed drawings to obviously things that properly describe the work for our contractor friends. These are just a few examples of that work. Some nice details, joinery details, windows. And then this shows probably pretty good the philosophy we developed, and part of the design philosophy in terms of celebrating these hipped forms and kind of repeating them and bringing them down in a composition that suits the house. And this oak frame construction here is very 17th century, 16th century inspired, big oak bits, and just feels like quite a matter of fact kind of piece of architecture attached to the existing building. And some more details just developed. So you saw the original freehand drawings for planning, and now these are the more exacting working drawings. This is all constructed now, and it looks quite good, except for the windows. They're not put in quite yet. So, And here's Carpenter Oak's first image of the oak frame. So this is all going to be exposed internally with a white timber boarded sarking, all this stuff exposed for the benefit of our clients. And then the client, of course, needs a pool and a pool house. So here's the house. Here's the house in extension, and we've got permission for this now, moving forward. So this again is a Carpenter Oak piece of work, a swimming pool and just some more amenity space. So if you remember, here's the site. So there's the house, and there's the site for the pool just to the south there. And it doesn't stop there, because so this is just a section of the pool. So here we have the house, end of the hall, and the pool house pushed over here. And of course, remember the original historic plan I showed you with the other buildings sitting in and about the garden. And again, that's exactly what we're doing here, although previously it might have been here, according to that 1876 plan. But we just shoved it over, and that's, was quite acceptable. Then the cart shed, the listed cart shed and the outbuildings, cart shed being restored as a cart shed. We're not doing anything new with that other than restoring it exactly as it is. And then a new granny annex in this part of the building for Mom, so she can live with the family there. And this building is the unlisted bit of building that I discussed earlier, but that works out very well for that purpose. And then just finally, again, similarly related. So when we were talking about Roche Court and the barns, we talked about the ancient monuments that's been taken away from the barn, which made our job maybe a little bit easier. In this case, what we had was an unlisted agricultural buildings that we got planning permission to convert to two residences. So this was a old farm office, stables, the barn, and the flint and brick barn, actually gorgeous. This building, when we started the process, it wasn't listed. Halfway through considering our planning application, the local authority decided to list it. So we had to completely redo our planning design access and now heritage statements, resubmit that, show the validity of what we were doing in the light of where we had already got to with the design and the client, and kind of move forward on that basis. And of course, we got permission, and the clients executed the scheme very nicely, actually. So here we are. And again, celebrating the barn, again, keeping all the timber frame exposed and looking great. These great kind of structures and views you get from a little mezzanine area down into the space below. And then, related back to Roche Court, this is the finished room now in the cottage, all, done and dusted, and the clients inhabiting it quite happily. So, the decisions we're faced with is in what to keep and what to let go. You've all probably been faced with this. Many of these buildings will outlast us. They create the gestalt within which the next generations and communities will set the scenes of their lives. But things change, priorities change, and these artifacts will only last if they continue to be useful. And they only can continue to be useful if we're able to change them enough that they are useful. And most councils and national governments have acknowledged that the climate crisis and are looking to address this. We will not even come close if historic building conservation policy is focused on rather singular issues and remains hell-bent on, for instance, retaining single glazing. We have the tools to do it new and better, and with improved materials and systems where we still can retain the historic integrity of the buildings we cherish, and retaining the embodied carbon in these main elements of structure and allowing more intensive reuse of historic sites is essential to this progress. These lessons can be extended to the rest of the built estate, of course, more broadly, as well as in order to maximize repair and repurposing. We cannot live well and better, and the existing built estate and the features we value therein will not survive or thrive if everything that came before is treated as a museum piece. Keep the best and adapt and improve the rest. Thank you. There's the cottage now, weathered in a bit. So, yeah. So, any questions?
What did it cost?
So it's costing a lot. So I think we're probably up to about $3 and a bit million at the moment. Yeah.
I'm surprised.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's more to come, but yeah. Well, if only, right? But yeah, it's it's expensive, of course. Yeah. But it's housing. It's housing 2 families. It's not an imbalanced investment, I would argue. There's 11 acres with the site. They'll use it for other things. Hopefully, I'm trying to talk them into planting a vineyard, but they're not quite ready for that yet, but I might get there eventually. So, yeah.
What stage did you start engaging with the planners as pre-out?
Right at the very beginning.
So before they went to auction?
No, as soon as they took on the site. And I was getting paid by that. Yeah, so you got to value your service, don't you? So we started the conversation very early in order to get them on side. But the conservation officer had been involved because the barn was a building at risk, and the conservation had previously been involved in the site, just doing some earlier stabilization works to the barn. So she was really keen to move this forward, and still is. She's really on board and championing us along the way. So very useful. Yeah, so early conversations with the officer. The thing about that, though, is that with like pre-apps, and you guys all may have come across this before, is that it does give the local authority a chance to say no, but it depends how they say no, or what you bring to the table is kind of important in terms of setting the scene at the early stages. So I just had a client who went and they did their own pre-app, and they had no drawings, they had nothing, and of course all the officer did was parrot back policy with, because she had nothing before her to help her help the client. So now we got to kind of go back a step and move forward carefully. So yeah. So early stage discussions. But if you can get informal discussions and get their interest and pull them into the process, that would be the best thing to do.
That's great.
We good?